Okay, so it is official. Celtic are out of Europe, out of the Champions League after a 1-1 draw against Shakhtar in Celtic Park on the second last game in this Champions League group stages. They go to Madrid next week. It's a nothing game. It means nothing, but it would be nice to finish off with at least a point against the reigning champions. Welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown. Enda Call here with you alongside Alan Morrison and Juco James as always. Now, I went very hard on this podcast on Monday night when I was discussing this game. I said that I would be very annoyed if Celtic did not come away with a win. They didn't get a win, they got a draw. And I wasn't as upset as I thought I would be here, James, that Celtic didn't get a win at Celtic Park. I thought they should have. I thought they could have. They very well could have, but they didn't. So, talk us through your initial reaction to all of this.
Yeah, just, disappointment, frustration. There's the fan side, which is those in particular. And then, part of the reasons why we try to set out objective analysis is because then you can measure things towards a benchmark and then kind of evaluate how things went. And I as Alan and I talked about going into the group once the draw happened, we thought, I don't want to speak for you, Alan, but I think that was my memory of my recollection of our conversation was that third and dropping down to the Europa League was kind of a baseline aspirational expectation. We thought second getting out of the group was probably a bridge too far, realistically. So from a results perspective, we've fallen short of that, obviously. I think from a performance perspective, it's a lot more complicated, and we can get into that. I have a bunch of numbers that we can throw at that. But yeah, so I'm disappointed in that regard. I think from a performance perspective, we're right on the edge of that third and fourth. So I think that's probably the edge that we were on, meaning that if had a little bit more positive variance, as we like to say, we could have gotten that third place finish, but I don't think we were likely even close to finishing second in the group, even with the performance levels that we had.
Yeah. So look, we will touch on what this means for Celtic overall. I think that's generally what this podcast is going to be. It's not really going to be so much a Shakhtar 1-1 draw analysis. It's more going to be analysis of where we're at and where we're at in the standings of world football after getting knocked out at the group stages with one game still to play. But Alan, there was a few changes to this team in Celtic Park against Shakhtar. Giakoumakis started with Kyogo. Matt O'Reilly once again played as the number 6. There were a couple of very interesting changes that Ange made going into this game with, I suppose, the idea of converting chances that we hadn't taken in previous games. But a lot of people after the game seemed to think that it was a very disjointed, very weird selection from Ange. Didn't really work. Matt O'Reilly didn't work as a number 6. Giakoumakis and Kyogo can't play together. I have to say, I can't agree with any of that. I thought it was a pretty fluid performance for a lot of the game once again, and then Celtic got caught in the break, and that's pretty much the situation it's been for the last 5 games in this competition.
Yeah, I didn't. It struck me, when the selection came out, that it really wasn't a particularly radical change to what we've already been playing. We've been playing we've been playing a sort of, I'm going to call it a 4-2-3-1 most of the season. Actually, it's rarely a 4-2-3-1. It's just a conceptual thing to put on the screen at the beginning of the game. I really think of it as a framework, because when we have the ball, we've generally got probably 6 if not 8 players that are trying to find spaces in attacking positions. And when we don't have the ball, we fall into a sort of 4-4-2 shape to be compact, or we're pressing, in which case we don't really have a formation. We're just trying to press. So formations are kind of people get very exercised about, but they're just, I would think of it as a loose framework more than anything else. But essentially, Kyogo was playing in the position that Haksabanovic had played in the last few games, or Hatate had played in, Rogic played in last year, sort of thing, more as a a number 10 really. So more of a link player between sort of midfield and forward line. I think Abada, Giakoumakis, and Kyogo were all on the pitch because he just wanted his best what he would see as his best finishers, if I can use that language, on the pitch at the same time. I think it was honestly as simple as that. Just get the three players on the pitch who, if the ball breaks them in the box, are most likely to finish. I think it really was that simple, and it was an absolutely reasonable way to set the team up. That's not a stretch for Kyogo to play that role. It wasn't a stretch for Abada to be on the right wing. It wasn't a stretch for Giakoumakis to lead the line. So I didn't get a sense of any of that really. And overall, I think I kind of agree with James, and I'm afraid, which is that like I say, I hoped we'd finish third. In fact, when the draw was made, I hoped we'd finish second because we all know what Shakhtar and the Ukrainian teams are going through. We thought they may be under a lot of duress, and maybe having lost players, they wouldn't be very coherent. But actually, if anything, that is, as often happens under duress, teams knit together, and they've got a much stronger Ukrainian core than what they've ever had because a lot of the foreign players have gone. We thought Leipzig were in a mess when we got the draw was made, and then they weren't. They changed their manager. That's just it. And then Real Madrid were Real Madrid. So, I'm genuinely disappointed. It doesn't look like we're going to make that third spot. I think that's to me, European football after Christmas is like is one of the little things on the checklist to say this is going to be a good season, successful season if we do that. So that was a disappointment. But on the other hand, again, as James said, if you look at the performance versus results, right, and that's what you tend to do, is there's two games we probably should have won and one game we should have drawn. And I know it's if, buts, and maybes, but I'm looking at it from a performance perspective. If we were sitting here from a performance perspective saying we should have lost all 5 games, then we'd be having a much different conversation. But in terms of performance and the underlying numbers, not like to a ridiculous degree. So, for example, the XG from the other night was, according to Opta, was 1.38 to Celtic, 0.87 to them. That's not enough to mean that you'll win the game probably more than about 50% of the time, probably something like that. But we had 2 games like that against them. On balance, probably a 1-goal win to Celtic wouldn't have been outrageous. And then we had the home game against Leipzig that really, by all the data, was a draw apart from the final score. So if we'd been sitting here with 2 wins and 1 draw, I think we'd have got 3rd place. So from a performance perspective, I can't get too critical overall. I'm trying to look big picture here, but obviously results is what most people kind of focus on. And disappointed not to be 3rd. I guess that's my kind of high level view, I suppose.
A few things just to sort of knit all this together and put it into perspective. So I think firstly for our group, as well as what you're saying with the results that we potentially might have left behind us, there are also performance or results that went against us in this group stage, like Shakhtar picking up that draw against Real Madrid, like Leipzig beating Real Madrid last night. That all really just it changed the dynamic of the group. And if that's what happens, if you don't actually pick up the points that you should pick up along the way, you do get punished in that way as well. And just to put into perspective, the other clubs that are out of Europe after last night, so Ajax are gone, Rangers are gone, Atletico are gone, Leverkusen are gone, Barcelona are gone, Pilsen are gone, Copenhagen are gone, and Juventus are gone. So there's a lot of big clubs there that are gone out of the Champions League at the group stages. So that's number one, what I will say on this. And number 2 is that a lot of people are asking the question, is there progress? Has there been progress? I think there has been progress because we weren't playing in the Champions League last year. We haven't been in the Champions League since 2018. And we did pick up points along the way. So by definition of progress, there has been progress along the last couple of years in terms of Celtic in the Champions League. And just finally, and I don't want it to turn into a look what they're doing versus look what we're doing. But I think if you compare the 2 teams that are playing in the Champions League from Scotland, Rangers finished with 0 points, Celtic finished with 2 points, but they are completely and utterly different campaigns that these 2 teams had. Because Rangers never got started in the first place. They got absolutely destroyed throughout the entire campaign. Whereas Celtic are coming away thinking, God, we lost a few points there. We should have picked up points there. We should have won this game. We should have drew that game. So that's where I'd rather be than be where we have been in previous years. In other years where people talk about the likes of Brendan Rodgers, when he was in the Champions League, we did absolutely nothing then. We didn't look like picking up results then. We got our arses handed to us then. Whereas under Ange, you're coming away from the games disappointed. I think it's good to be disappointed rather than coming away completely just giving up on the team and giving up on life and giving up on everything to do with it. I think that by definition is progress in the group stages of the Champions League. So that's just a few things that I wanted to get off my chest before we move on and talk about the grander picture of where Celtic are at. So I guess, James, if you want to pick it up from there, which do you want to start on? Do you want to start on the progress question? Has there been progress for Celtic in the Champions League in European football? Let's put it that way, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a hard question to answer because it depends on what point you're measuring from. It's very kind of, I think it's littered with kind of subjectivity. So relative to the 16-17 campaign, are you doing it from when Ange came in, right? Is it progress under Ange? I think that's an obvious yes. Is it progress as a club? I think it's kind of hard to argue that over any kind of longer time frame. So I think it's kind of both. and I think the more interesting question, at least to me analytically, is kind of going forward, what's the project, and is there likely to be progress next season and the season after, hopefully, obviously assuming we qualify. But even if we don't, I mean, generally in Europe, that's and I think the verdict's still out on that. Obviously we're hopeful and like to be optimistic, but I still have a lot of questions. And so I have some stats to throw at you to put some of this in perspective, because I think it puts some of this, I actually was surprised when I looked at it. So let's start with my ball and play time statistic, my favorite one so far. Okay. So what I've done is I've done a bunch of different metrics, and basically through the 5 group games, because everyone's played 5 group games now, the 32 teams in the Champions League, how does Celtic kind of rank on different things out of the 32? Ball and play time, guess where Celtic ranks? Enda, I'm going to ask you first. Out of the 32 teams.
7th.
Alan?
I'm going to go top 5 on the basis I think teams have deliberately kept the ball in play, knowing how that we play.
We are number 1. We average so far 62.68 minutes in play. Number 2 is Manchester City. Real Madrid and Shakhtar are 3 and 4. And like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we're talking about Bayern Munich's, the Barcelona's. Leipzig is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th. So yeah,
but they all want to do it for their own benefits. We're there as a victims.
Right.
We're number 1 back because other teams wanted us to be number 1. That's the sad truth.
We're also firing the ball in real quickly as well. I think that was my favorite theme of the tournament, was watching and listening to commentators who clearly hadn't watched the Celtic game all season, in awe of how quickly Celtic get the ball moving again.
Right. And that's, so again, this comes back to how do you make potentially tweaks to things as opposed to wholesale changes to playing style, right? So do you go kamikaze style on every throw in and every corner, or do you need to chill the F out a little bit and give your players a moment's time not to be going balls to the wall the entire game, right? So that's why I raised that one. I mean, that's a big number, and we've hit on that repeatedly in recent weeks. So my next stat in StatsBomb, it's called F2 pressures, and basically what that means is number of pressures in the opposition's half. Okay, so I think a pressure is defined as a defender going at the other team within 5 seconds of getting the ball. So on a numbers per game basis, where do you think Celtic rank out of the 32 teams? We'll start with you, Alan, this time.
Probably 5th or 6th again.
Okay. Enda?
4th.
Number 1.
Is the answer going to be number one every time?
No, it's
Because,
not.
you know,
It's
just-
not. But again, I'm building up.
It'll be one or it'll be 32.
I'm building up a thing here. So the other teams in the top, so I'm going to do them in order. So it's Celtic 1, Salzburg 2, Liverpool 3, Madrid 4, Man City 5, Marseille, and then Bayern Munich. Okay. So I think that speaks to the intensity with which we're playing. Now the possession stats are different, right? We averaged lower possession than most of those teams, so you kind of have to adjust for that. But that's where we lead to the next stat, which is defensive distance. So this is the average point on the pitch in which a defensive action takes place. So again, it's another proxy for how far high up the pitch you're playing and you're engaging in defensive actions on an average basis. So again, out of 32 teams, Enda, will go with you. Where do you think Celtic ranks? And I'll give you a hint. It's not number one. So don't play that game.
All right, number 2.
Okay. Alan?
I can't believe we're that high. I'm going to go number 10.
We're 5th.
Right.
So again, the other teams at the top: Barcelona, Manchester City, Tottenham Hotspur, Liverpool. That's ahead of us. Okay. So the reason why I thought I'd frame this is we're trying to play a way that is very specific. And I'm concerned about the purity of it, doing it at this level with the resources that we have, unless we go really, really smart on recruitment. So I think there's been progress. And so the other numbers I have, I'll share. So I make up some of my own stuff just based off of my own analytical background. So one of the things I've come up with is core OBV. No one else does this. This is completely my made up stuff. I haven't seen anyone else do it. But on-ball value is broken down into 5 components, 2 of which are shot and goalkeeper. I exclude those because they're such low number each game, and the variance on them swings all around. And to me, in any given game, a keeper can have a howler that distorts it, or a guy shoots the ball from 25 yards and top corners, top shelves it. So I exclude that, and I look at just the pass, dribble and carry, and defensive action, those 3.
Mm-hmm.
And Celtic actually ranked 15th on that. So I think that speaks to, out of 32 teams, again, that puts us right on the cusp, actually, of, and when I say 15th, that's differential. So the differential between what our OBV was and those 3 core components versus our opposition. That's right on the edge of qualifying, theoretically, of getting out of the group and, the 16 teams that make it out. So that's the positive. Right. But if you break those down, that's almost all in the pass section. So and again, to me, I worry about that being system driven because of how smart we're coached and the movement and the dynamics of how we're going. Because the pass differential is 13th, whereas the dribble and carry and defensive actions are 27th and 28th. Right. So I as I kind of boil all this down, my analysis is that it's a dual-edged sword of what our system is. And I'm just concerned about our ability to scale this, as I said, unless we're really going to be smart with recruitment, or we get a season where we just get good finishing and a keeper or a keeper that stands on their head. Because again, the variance on those 2 components are huge, and you can get 3 or 4 games of that kind of stuff swinging in your direction, like Rangers did getting through the knockout stages in Europa League last season. It happens. That's part of tournament football. Teams that get hot or have that kind of variance can go a long way. So that can happen. We can hope for it. But that's why I look at these kind of underpinning, the kind of core stuff. And there's some things to be positive about it there, I think, but also, some things to still be quite concerned about.
Well, I think when you look at what Frankfurt are doing this year in comparison to Rangers, it shows you there was 2 teams on 2 different trajectories there, and how they got to the Europa League final wasn't exactly linear. But let's talk about what that all means in football terms, Alan, because basically there's 2 sides to the current fan analysis of all of this, and that is one, that Celtic need to be more pragmatic, that they've had success in the past by being pragmatic in Europe. Not really sure what people mean by that, because they haven't really been successful in the past by being pragmatic. They've got a couple of big results here and there. But when you talk about Ange in particular, so James has sort of outlined how far we're playing up there, how high we're pressing, how much we want the ball to be in play. And a lot of people are saying, okay, well, maybe just get a result when you get, like, just try get a result rather than going helter-skelter and going full whammy at your game plan. Can you do what Ange is trying to do on a long-term basis, improving the club, by not doing it the full way for 1 or 2 years? Because I don't think you can. I don't think you progress the club, progress the game plan, progress the players that you're working with by not playing your game plan for 1 or 2 years, and then you can't just switch it on in 3 years' time when Celtic have better players. You need to work with this for a number of years in order to instill it as the identity of the club.
Yeah, I think there's a danger in these conversations of thinking that when we think about words like pragmatism and Ange ball, that this is a binary sort of situation where there's an extreme at one end where you do this, and there's an extreme at another end where you do this, right? And that just isn't the reality of the world, frankly. Okay, so let's just strip it back a little bit and just remind ourselves where we are. Okay, so what Postecoglou believes is that the best way to win any football match at any level is to put the opposition under as much pressure as possible, and that by forcing mistakes in their defensive third and having as many players attacking as you possibly can at any time and keeping them under pressure, but also at the same time when you've got the ball, maintaining a degree of control of the ball. So it's two things: it's control of the football, and it's applying as much pressure as you can in the opposition's defensive third when you haven't. And he believes that's the best way to win football matches. And now that is a very high level philosophy. It isn't a tactics manual. Okay, so let's be very straight about that. There are many different ways to achieving that philosophical, or that framework that I've just described at a very high level. That what I've just described at a high level, you could put on a PowerPoint. It would take one slide, and you could call it a strategy if you like. Okay, that's what we're talking about. How you implement that strategy has to have variability around it, because circumstances are different and opponents are different. So that comes down to the tactical side. So what does, in the question was, does what we're doing scale? So I think there's evidence from this campaign that the way that we've implemented tactics to meet that strategy, there's bits of it I don't think will scale, and I just can't see a way around it. And what I mean by that is, and we've talked about this on every show, is and then James mentioned it, is this conundrum around pressing as if you're Bayern Munich, but only having 40% of the ball, right? I don't think you can do those two things, okay? I don't think you can do those two things. I don't think it's physically possible to play at the intensity and speed of a Champions League game and have 40% possession and press as if you're Bayern Munich. So I think you have to find a way to square that. Now, that doesn't mean that, therefore, the only other alternative to doing that is to park the bus and put 10 men behind the ball. That isn't the case. Right, the way you square that is you choose to press more selectively, and that is a very difficult thing to do. It requires high-end team coordinated decision making by the team to say, do we press in the second? Do we make that decision to press, or do we fall back into shape? Celtic didn't look under much pressure in any game when they fell back into a shape, which they did, into a fairly medium block. We kept a high line, and I've got no problem with the high line. Squeeze the game as much as you dare. I've got no issue with that one. I think that does scale. But I think the tweaks, if you want to call them that, to the tactics to meet the strategy are to the pressing decision-making. And then the second aspect of it is, do you have the players that are actually capable of playing at this level to execute on it? And that is a difficult one. And clearly, we don't know that until we see them in the heat of battle, right? So that's something that you got to give the manager time to decide: is this player, and because Andrew's going to end up with players in the squad who he thinks in the SPFL, this player is hugely valuable to help me win the league to get into the Champions League. But once we're there, it doesn't, can't step up to that sort of level, right? It's going to be that we're going to have that kind of profile of player. We're probably going to have quite a few of those, and that's going to be a difficult one to square. But the tactical side of it, I'm pretty clear on what I think is the thing that doesn't work and has to change. But you don't throw it all away. You refine it and you improve it.
Exactly. And that would be my main point, because if you look at, and I know people hate when I bring up the Premier League teams or Premier League or English or whatever, but if you look at when Jurgen Klopp took over Liverpool and when Pep Guardiola took over Man City, both of them did absolutely crap their first year. They did terrible because they were trying to do something that the players that they had at their disposal did not know how to do and did not have the engine to do. And then the next year and the following year, it kept getting better. And suddenly they have 11 players on the pitch. They have the game plan in place, and those players know exactly what they're going to do. And they're the two best teams in the world for the past 5 years. Like this is how it works. You cannot just take a club that were trained by Neil Lennon, for God's sake, for the last number of years, and expect these players to know exactly what you're going to do. Even the top level players in the world that you can think of don't know how to implement these game plans. Sergio Aguero spoke just last week about when Pep Guardiola took over Manchester City. He had no idea how to press. He didn't know how to do it, and he didn't have the engine to do it, and he was blowing by the 50th minute. And we're talking about Sergio Aguero here, like a really, really top level player. So I'm just working with lower level players and still trying to teach them this absolutely elite way of playing football. It's going to take time. And I think that's where I would argue that you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You can't take a step back this season. You cannot make conservative choices at Champions League level and expect to develop that at Champions League level next year. You need to take these risks this year and see how it works. And then, like you're saying, refine it over the next couple of years. So that's overall where I feel about this campaign. So I guess then if we want to talk about players, then where do we most need to refine this?
Can I just say one thing? Because people throw around, Club Brugge, you mentioned benchmarks and aspirational clubs.
Club Brugge have been the club that everybody has loved pointing towards.
Well, right. So, and again, I'm not that familiar with their setup, but I'm more familiar with Salzburg because I find them endlessly fascinating. But one of the things I've mentioned before is part of what they've started to do, and they've figured out in the last, let's say, 5 years, is they're recruiting very young. But what they're doing, so they're getting people before their athletic peak. Athletic peak's kind of 24 to 27. And they're getting them while their brain's still developing at like 17, 18, 19. And they're putting them through like virtual reality training sessions to learn this pressing that Alan's talking about, right? So they're going through advanced training with the top technology in order to program their brains and to, indoctrinate them, the muscle memory, as far as how do they press in a coordinated fashion. So that's why, if you watch Salzburg, they're competing. I'll say that they're competing at a Champions League level consistently. And look at who they started against Chelsea the other night: 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds. It's pretty incredible what they're doing. And I've consistently said, we're not going to be able to do that. You can't. There's too much intellectual property. There's too much, like really sophisticated stuff that they're doing. You're not going to be able to mimic them, but there are, I think, lessons to be learned to try and move in that kind of direction. So to Alan's point, these things are not easy. And the type of clubs that we're competing against are going to really advance significant lengths in order to do some of the same things. And, the Bayern Munichs of the world are throwing, and the Man Cities of the world are throwing hundreds of millions of pounds at it to buy the best and most athletic players in the world. And then you got somebody like Salzburg who's doing it their way, but ultimately they're all kind of going in this direction of raising the bar. And that's how we're playing like that. That's why I threw all those numbers out there, is that's the neighborhood who we're trying to kind of compete with, playing this style. And it's going to be really hard to get these guys at the athletic level with the cognitive functioning that's going to be able to execute it. And I just wanted to mention that because I agree with Alan. This is a really high bar to get players that are going to blend those two things together to do it at this level.
Mm-hmm. And well, I mean, like Ange mentioned Brugge as well as an example of this progression that you need to make. Like they've been a Champions League club for a number of years now, and
Yes.
the manager who had them last year is now in charge of Ajax. No, I know Ajax got, they got pumped out of their group, but I mean, Ajax are a huge club, so that's a level of coaching that you're talking about. They had an incredibly elite coach, and now they've improved on that this season because they have the money to do so. They have the capabilities to do so. And I think, I, I just think, what do you think, Alan? The reality is that Celtic become like a Brugge or a Shakhtar, even a Shakhtar, for example, or a club that is just consistently in the Champions League, competing to get out of the group every single year, and hopefully progression on towards that. Let's just say, for example, Ange stays forever. Let's just say we have carte blanche on Ange, and he's just at the club forever. Do you think it's possible? Because I shiver at what Celtic would do to Scottish football every year if they just kept on this just non-stop trajectory that they're on at the minute.
I mean, I think it's possible. As the old joke goes, as regards Brugge, it's taking me 9 years to be an overnight success. And that's the reality. It's taken them maybe not 9 years. I can't remember. They've been in many Champions League campaigns, and this year, year upon year of probably, and I'm not familiar with the background of the club in terms of what their culture and philosophy is, but they've probably built up to the stage that, in the context of a league and being a club that's probably, well, the club's certainly smaller than Celtic, and being in a league that's probably not much bigger than ours, they can regularly be spending £10 million on players. And that's where we need to build towards, where our finances are such that we can regularly spend £10 million on the best 19, 20-year-olds in Europe or wherever we're allowed to get players from under this glorious sunlit upland Brexit nirvana that we're all part of. And then we recycle them for 30, 40 million rather than buying players for 2 or 3, 5 million and recycling them for 10, 15. So there's an upscale to what we're doing that we have to get into. Now that's going to take years to build that. Okay, and what has to happen in the background is all the stuff we've talked about many times, which is, becoming excellent at all the stuff that a club like Celtic, there are no barriers to Celtic having world-class physiotherapists, world-class nutritionists, world-class data analysts, world-class sports scientists, world-class, all of those background activities and those technical activities that go towards seeking the millimeter by millimeter marginal gains in performance, in recovery, in fitness, in nutrition, in scouting. All of those things are not outside of the gift of Celtic. So that has to happen at the club, in line with building up this scouting network. It has to be as broad as it possibly can be. It has to be as sophisticated as it possibly can be. And now, obviously, we can't spend as much as Man City, but again, how much does that all cost? It probably costs you less than what it costs to have Jota on your payroll for 5 years, Frank, to be honest with you. So, don't have one £6 million players for 5 years. Think of it that way, and invest in all this stuff, and you'll probably find that over a 10-year period, you'll more than make your money back, and you'll get demonstrable gain. So these are all the things that need to happen. And then we've got the visionary man with a plan, that everyone wants to get behind. We've got a unity between board and manager, it would seem. The Ange has got reign to do what he wants, but we need to make it so that he concentrates on the football team, and the rest of the organisation gets on with making sure that everything else that's happening is best in class behind the scenes, because there's no reason why it shouldn't be, frankly. And then we'll start to be able to trade in the level of player that we'll need to play the way that we want to play. But it'll take time. This could be a 5-10 year project easily.
Well, that's the issue, is that it's it is a results driven business, and eventually people do lose patience. Just to clarify something, because Quinny points out in the comments that the former Brugge manager has actually taken over Monaco. Schroeder, who is now in charge of Ajax, actually replaced Philippe Clement, who was the Brugge manager who went to Monaco. So he was there for a couple of months. He joined in January and then left the following season to go take over Ajax. He's actually had an extraordinary career, aside from moving from Brugge to Ajax. But in general, then, where are we looking at in the immediacy? Because a lot of this conversation is so hard to sort of wrap your head around, because it is what could happen in 5 years if Celtic do X, if they change their nutritionist to Y, if they get in X on a transfer basis and things like that. What do they need to do in the immediate future, be that January transfer market, be that summer transfer market? Where do they need to immediately start investing in your opinions?
I mean, for me, there's still the same three that we didn't really address, which is
defensive mid.
Not for me. Defensive mid. Kind of the elite European level athlete in a box to box midfield role. Meaning that as good as I think Hatate and O'Reilly are in their own ways, neither of them are that kind of elite athlete from a size, speed, agility perspective. And I think we're missing that relative to transitions. And whether you want to call that a 6 or an 8, somebody who's going to be able to use their athleticism to patrol that midfield and help with these transitions that we are inherently going to concede.
Can I just add to that? That person must be willing to take a booking when a booking is there.
Well, fair enough. Yep. Fair enough.
That's my pet peeve with the Celtic team.
And then, a ball playing center back and, a sweeper keeper. I mean, to me, those are the three things that we're still kind of light on. So that hasn't really changed, in my opinion, anyway. And they're not again, these are not easy things to come by. I mean, it's not like they just grow on trees and you go pluck one off, but
yeah, exactly. They have to be found. Can I just actually, before I go to you, Alan, can I throw a more specific question at you on this point? So 3 players that I think were kind of showing up, not to the extent where I don't think they can improve, and there is promising signs there, but 3 players that I think particularly struggled, let's say, in the Champions League this year were Abada, who, his obvious weaknesses of not being able to dribble past the player were showing up quite a bit in this campaign. Hatate, who has been incredibly wasteful with some of his passes, and a couple of his passes led to several goal chances across the Champions League group stages, including the Shakhtar goal this year or this week. And I would say Maeda, who just struggled overall, but I think his form was quite slightly off throughout the Champions League campaign. I don't know if it was so much his quality, but I think on the ball, he doesn't offer enough in the Champions League level to justify his weaknesses on the ball. That would be my 3 weakest players in terms of the Champions League campaign.
Yeah, and some of that might be kind of, we're talking about, like you said, form, or are we talking about we'll never be able to play at that level is a different question, I think. So, I mean, I think, to your point in terms of, we threw a lot out there, and you're saying, Enda, it's just bewildering. It's like anything, any organization and change, right? You break it down, you have multiple programs running. Some of them can run in parallel. Some of them run, have dependencies on X being complete before Y can be implemented, type of thing. So you just need a good project manager in real terms to kind of bring it all together. But a lot of these things could be done in the background in parallel. It's more about organizational culture, everyone kind of moving in the same direction, really, and the organizational goals being aligned, as opposed to every division within every department having its own bottom line to square. That's all that everyone cares about, which is where we were 2 years ago. So it's that you can break it down in terms of on the pitch. My understanding is that Ange didn't spend all the money that was in the pot in the transfer window, which again, if you think about that means that he doesn't, and I think we've seen this, right? Would you trust this man with your money? I think the answer is yes. He wouldn't spend money just for the hell of it, just because, I've got another 10 million to spend, or I'm not just making that number up, by the way. First thing that came into my head. Therefore I'm going to spend it, as a lot of managers would do, to try and get as much instant success as they want. If it's not the right player, if it's not the right position, or it's not the right character, personality, even the whole package, then he's not going to do it. So I think there'll be more strengthening in January. I think we'll see even greater strengthening. I think the areas we need to strengthen, personally for me, I completely agree in terms of midfield athleticism, and also I think we probably need another central striker. I think Giakoumakis is improving. He's been given a chance at this level, even as a 27-year-old, and I think his game is improving. I do worry about Kyogo. I don't. Again, he's 27. I think. He had it was a very, very serious hamstring injury last season, and I don't know if he'll ever get the same explosive pace. And I'm talking about being able to movement over short distances, really, which is a sort of trademark. I've got no data for that. It just strikes me that he's not quite as pin prick sharp as perhaps he was. And is that a little bit to do with just again, that's a really serious injury to come back from, and his age, it's not like he's 17 and he's probably going to get that flexibility back again. It's something that's going to have to be managed. So long story short, I would probably look to bolster the striking department as well. I think we need to address having a goalkeeper, because even the lad from Shakhtar, Trubin, you can see just the way the quickness with which he was able to recycle the ball, take crosses, get on his feet, move. He was comfortable. It's that kind of thing, right? We're not talking about, he probably isn't as good a goalkeeper in one-on-one situations as Joe Hart is, but he's probably quicker and more agile at rescuing the ball in his own area, recovering the ball in his own area, and then recycling the play and getting the ball moving. So it's that kind of profile you probably want to look for. And I still think we're short at centre back. I do wonder that we've not got 4 centre backs that are really of the calibre that we probably need. So I think there's still a lot of work to do, and we've still got probably people in the squad that probably are doing a good job and being good teammates, but aren't going to probably be part of long-term plans. So I still think there's a good couple of transfer windows of activity, but again, it never stops to use the phrase, because you'll buy new players in. They're not going to be Championship ready, Champions League ready players, because we don't operate in that market, and therefore you don't know if they'll step up until you get through. And then there's obviously the jeopardy of can we get through to the Champions League. So I think there's going to be a continual flux of change. But those, to me, to keep it simple, to break it down, what's in front of us for the next transfer window, those would be the things I'd probably be looking at.
Mm-hmm. And I think, again, just to come back to the point of, this is the first Champions League campaign for a lot of these players in their entire careers. And I'll use the example of Greg Taylor. How many people would have said last season, and again said during the summer transfer window, and again said when Bernabeu joined the club, that Greg Taylor was not Champions League ready? I would say
none of us.
No,
for sure.
We wouldn't say that about we wouldn't say that about one of our own, but I would say pretty much 95% of the fan base probably would have said that Greg Taylor is not a Champions League left back. And if you're talking about a Leipzig or a Salzburg or even a Brugge, is he a left back level for them? Probably not. Is he a knockout Champions League level left back? Probably not. But he's been Celtic's best player in the Champions League, in my opinion. And I'm not basing that off any stats. I just think he's been the player who stood up and performed to the level that you expect from him. So what happens next year with O'Reilly, who's playing his second campaign in the Champions League, or Abada, who might have even grown a little bit since the last campaign into the Champions League? Giakoumakis again. Players can improve from the point of where they are. It is not just this is a player, this is his standard, this is the standard he's going to be for the rest of his career. Players can improve, and I do think with the coaching that Celtic have been putting in, they will improve on that next year. So I think, even to your point of where we're operating at in the transfer window, Celtic will bring in players like, say, even Haksabanovic, who they brought in. He's probably not Champions League ready, but he might be next season. And again, the players that we bring in January or in summer next year, they may not be ready for next year's campaign, but they might be ready for the following campaign. So you just need to be long-term in your thinking. I'll use another English example of this. Manchester City, they had an agreement with Rodri 2 seasons before they brought him to the club that he was going to join the club and be their defensive midfielder to replace Fernandinho. 2 years later, he was Champions League ready. He was the player that they expected him to be once he got at the club, and he hit the ground running. But that was 2 years in the making. They knew he wasn't ready then, but they said to the club, they said to Rodri, we'll get you in 2 years. We'll come back. Here's what we'll give you. And then you'll be ready. And he was. And that's where Celtic need to be thinking. That's where, in my opinion, Celtic's fan base need to be thinking, okay, this year's a disappointment, but 2 years from now, we could be a much, much better outfit. And the players that we have at our club, it's not about constantly going out and refreshing 11 players at your club. You can't improve them. Like, deathly silence.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. But again, this comes back to, squad planning, and making smart investments, making smart sales, which we have not been great at. Actually, I'd argue
a lot of people in the comments making that point that we need to sell off big players for big money next
at a
season.
smart time, right? So, as Frimpong is now being rumored to go to wherever he's being rumored to go to, so it's setting up that conveyor belt. And back to this idea of are these players going to, it's all probabilistic, right? So you can't predict the future, but how many 27-year-olds are going to just all of a sudden improve in a way that's going to turn them into a Champions League level player when they haven't really shown that up until that point in their career? It's possible. There are late bloomers in sports and in life, but the probabilities are not great. You get someone who's 22, 23, more of a normal development curve. Okay, I can, from a probabilities perspective, you have a bunch of people like that in your squad, then sure, I can buy into that. So I think that's another part of this is we should be selling people next summer, if not in January. Probably at least 2, I would think, unless we're not going to be smart again. Meaning that, start selling some of these people at the age when they really should be sold, when maybe if they're not peak value, the balance between what their market value is and what their contract situation is. And so it's that conveyor belt that has to be set up. So even somebody like Greg Taylor, as much as, if there's an upper championship level team that rightfully so, I mean, the guy's had a tremendous growth spurt here from a production and from a performance perspective. If someone's willing to give us 10 million for Greg Taylor, that's why I got a lot of fan mail when I said that if we could get 15 million for Giakoumakis in August, you'd have to be insane not to sell him. So you have to have that discipline to be able to monetize some of these players and start this conveyor belt, because you have to have those resources, as we're saying. It's somebody in the comments, to buy that £9 million Edouard at 19. That's how you do it. You got to be able to sell some of these guys.
Do you want to come in and add on?
Yeah, absolutely spot on. And that's hard because we all get emotionally attached to the players. But listen, and we do see players improving under Ange, and Taylor's probably a shining light on that. And what do we mean by that? So, when I look at a player, and I think this has been obvious from all the teams that we've played, is that just look at their defenders. When because as James pointed out with the stats, the pressing stats that he gave, no teams in Europe have been put under more pressing pressure than the teams in our group, right? And look how they've coped with it. I mean, generally, we've done quite well. Even against Shakhtar, we forced them to cough the ball up about 6 times in their own third. So that means that they've got the ball possession in their own defensive third. 6 times we've turned the ball over. We did the same to Real Madrid, right? That's pretty impressive, okay? But also on top of that, a lot of times they play through the press. And how did they play through the press? Well, if you watch their players, they're able to take the ball in unpromising situations, near to touchlines, near to their own goal line in many cases, control it, have the physical strength to fend off someone who's pressing them, and then complete the next pass. And that sounds really simple, but to do that at that level under the pressure is what marks out a player that's able to play at that level. Okay, something like that wasn't in Greg Taylor's game a year ago, but now we saw him tight against the touchline on a few occasions where he was able to manipulate the ball, get out of very tight spots, and keep the ball moving. That's what good players do. That's what all the teams. That's what marks out great players. They've got balance. Their first touch is excellent. They've got strong. I don't mean they're big, muscly people. I mean they've got strong cores. They can fend off people, putting them under physical harassment, and they're technical enough to then execute under pressure, both physical and geographical on the pitch, and keep the ball moving. That's what you need to look for what makes so you can almost do a drill where you put somebody in a little square and have four big lads. Can they navigate their way out of those positions? That's a great test for somebody's technique and for their strength. And that's what all these teams can do. And if you don't have players that can do that, you're not going to do anything at this level. So, someone like Greg Taylor, I think, has improved massively in that regard, and you can see the evidence of it in those moments when he's put under huge physical pressure. But other players, not so much.
Yeah, big time. One of the goals that Celtic conceded is what you're talking about there, the Real Madrid goal, where it was just Celtic had them penned in, and then the next thing, 3 passes, boom, they're in our box. And then last night again, we'll call it a miss. I know there's an argument whether it was a miscontrol or a miss. I personally agree with you, Alan. I think it was a miscontrol. I don't think he goes to shoot. But that comes from Celtic had Shakhtar pinned in. One defender took 2 touches and then played a very risky pass across his box. And it got to his player up to Mudryk. He skins Carter Vickers, and then there's through on goal. So that's sort of where Celtic need to get to with our defense, that we can, if teams do press us high, we can do that without closing our eyes every time Jens or Starfelt has the ball.
So the other element of this is just the whole game management aspect of it. So that was Shakhtar's game, right? I mean, they're the classic, and I hate to sort of use generalizations along sort of any perceived racial grounds, but if you're old enough like me to remember when Eastern Europe was called Eastern Europe, the way Shakhtar play is classic Eastern European football from the 60s. It's slow, quick counter-attacking football. It's a throwback to the Dynamo Kyiv side of the mid 60s or early 70s. It really is. It's the classic Ukrainian, not Soviet model of
I'll be honest, Alan. I didn't get to see the Kyiv team of the 60s.
They were great.
A little bit before my time.
So listen, what I'm saying is there's no surprise there. We knew what we were going to get, but also same as in some ways Celtic. What James's stats were very interesting, because what they said was Celtic were in some respects so predictable, other teams knew how to, had already come up with a plan for how to counter them. Similarly, at 1-0 up against a team like that, it's actually quite easy to frustrate them. You just eliminate their ability to counter on you. Now, that probably means playing differently to how Ange plays, but that's the kind of game management that can get you a 1-0 win in the Champions League. Now, is that going too far in terms of what people would perceive as pragmatism? I don't know. But to me, it would just be smart to kind of nullify the other team and frustrate them, and then that would potentially allow you to get more space in those areas.
So just to wrap this all up, then Celtic are out of the Champions League. They're out of Europe. I probably would have been on the same level as you when it came to the predictions. I would have hoped the Celtic would get at least third in this group. That didn't come to fruition. One prediction that I made was Juventus were absolutely shocking in this entire competition, and I would have preferred to be in a group with them. I said that, and I'll stick by it. But I guess moving forward, the immediate thing that we want is not to lose to Livingston this weekend, and then move on, win the league, win the cup, win the League Cup. Treble's probably not an unrealistic thing to probably hope for this year, given the double last year. You're probably looking to improve on that and then keep on building it, essentially.
Yeah, but the thing is, sorry, James, I was just going to say.
No, go ahead, please.
We've still got this. We've talked a lot about how do we build a squad for Europe? How do we, reorganize the club to be aligned along modern lines, really. But we still have to win the league. We've still got to have the right players to win the league every season, and that's the circle that has to be squared every season. So, sorry, that was the obvious point I was just going to make.
Well, and what I was going to say is, I mean, as much as Rangers have been a bit of a dumpster fire, we're only 4 points ahead. I mean, as crazy as that is, I mean, that's the nature of the league, is that, and even a team out of the top two that aren't playing that well, for the most part, are not going to drop that many points. So, I mean, we're one crazy Tony Macaroni experience away from this being a 2-point race again. And obviously I don't think that's going to happen, but, but I agree. I mean, and to me now, it's extremely disappointing to me. I'm bitterly disappointed not to have post-Christmas European football to look forward to. And I think now it normally with us in Europe, I would almost argue that the League Cup should be deprioritized because of, the fixture congestion and we have some young players that really should be playing and, that kind of thing. But now it's like, okay, well, let's go for the treble. And I think we really should shoot for it because we don't have that European piece to gun for in 2023 now, at least in the winter. So, and I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be a realistic possibility. I mean, like favorites, it should be a significant probability that we could pull it off.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Hopefully get to the World Cup without any major injuries for the rest of the season is probably another prediction that you'd hope would come true. I mean, this is the thing as well. The World Cup is sort of messed up with the season as well. So we're in such a congested area right now that we're probably lucky that the game was on Tuesday, that Celtic don't play now until Sunday. So they've got a good period now where they can just sort of rest and get whoever picked up.
And
Tuesday
there's an epidemic of injuries across football because of all of this. I mean, these players are being flogged in a way that's just not natural. So teams are dealing with injuries all over the place, and that's probably this is only going to get worse through the World Cup because we just keep stacking these games on top of each other. So yeah, that's a great point, and I mean that could have a huge impact even on the on a prospective treble, but also on the title race. So yeah, we definitely can't afford any additional major injuries. I mean, because to Alan's point, if we lose one of our two strikers at this point for any significant period of time, I mean, that would be really concerning.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's hope that doesn't happen, and let's hope that we get a win at the Tony Macaroni before we finish up this week and the week that it was in Celtic football. The Real Madrid game, thankfully, doesn't really mean anything now next week, so it's a free hit. We can go and try get a pop at the current champions.
Well, they need to win, unfortunately.
They don't really.
No, they do. If they want to get,
they'll be fine.
If they want to get first place seeding, they'll need to win. So,
yeah,
yep.
I suspect we might get their A team for the first half.
Yeah.
As usual with the Champions League, though, there are a couple of teams in second place in the group stages that are actually, they're better than the teams that have finished first. So it's just funny how the group stages can go. It really is. It depends on the groups and where you land and who you're playing and when you're playing away and things like that. So, look, we don't need to worry about it. It's Livingston this weekend now, and then Real Madrid next week. So we'll be covering both those games on the podcast next week when we do record. But until then, if you want to get this podcast, if you missed the start on YouTube, you can get it on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to catch it on YouTube every week, you can get it at the Huddle Breakdown on YouTube is the best place to subscribe. But until then, we'll chat to you later. Good luck.